are you?
I'm well. How about you?
I'm doing good, thank you.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you for being here and recording this momentous occasion.
Yeah.
Did you turn on the power for the
Where's Kelly?
Is anyone good at with sound systems? That wants to help me?
Where's Kelly?
Huh?
Kelly, how's it going?
Kelly? Is Kelly here? Is it working now?
You up front?
Kelly Davis, calling Kelly Davis. Come to the front, please.
Oh, no, fine. I don't get him out. Does this work?
I don't think it's working.
I hear it now.
You hear it now?
Yep.
Okay. All right.
Not very loud.
Not very loud, but it works. Okay, good evening, everyone. My name is Tamara DeRitter. I am the chairwoman for the Rose City Park Neighborhood Association, and thank you for joining us for tonight's meeting. It should be a very entertaining one, if nothing else. Hopefully these mics will last. I've got 2 of them in case. I also have a boom box over here from my neighbor. It's a karaoke machine, so if these die, you can use that. All right. I wanted to welcome you to a very interesting meeting. We have candidates for 3 of the most powerful positions in the city of Portland government. We have the auditor as a candidate, auditor seat as a candidate, and then we have candidates for the city council seats number 2 and number 3. So given that there are only 5 city council positions, and the auditor serves as an independent investigative office, I would say that we have half of the city's elected officials here to speak to our meeting tonight. I have a couple announcements to begin with. First, we have a land acknowledgement statement that our neighborhood has adopted. As a neighborhood, we acknowledge the unceded land we occupy and its original inhabitants, including the Multnomah, Wasco, Cowlitz, Clackamas bands of Chinook, Tualatin, Kalapuya, Malala, and many other tribes who made their homes along the Columbia River. Currently united as the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde. The community includes over 30 tribes and bands from the Western Oregon, Northern California, and Southwest Washington area. We acknowledge that this land was seized through coercion, dishonesty, and brutality. We acknowledge the violent history of Euro-American settlement that sought to extinguish indigenous life from this land. We recognize the enduring influence that history has on our region and the nearly 70,000 native people descended from over 380 tribes living here today. Many of the major roads in Rose City Park neighborhood connected Chinook villages between 3 rivers, which colonizers named the Columbia, Willamette, and the Sandy, instead of honoring the older names such as Nichiwana, which is the Great River, or the largest of the 3. The following is our mission. Rose City Park neighborhood works to build a safe, equitable, and healthy environment for all neighbors, present and future. And we have neighborhood agreements. Now, this is hopefully how we present our questions with each other and treat each other with dignity and respect tonight. And if you can't, then we might likely ask you to leave. So, these were adopted in June of 2021 in the Rose City Park Neighborhood Association Board, based on community agreements from the Dome for D.D. White, Labor Collective, and Agreement Principles. We take collective and individual ownership. We will center and prioritize the most marginalized voices. We will assume the best intentions, and we will bring our best intentions. We will use ouch and oops to identify harms and to swiftly apologize in reply. We will take space and make space. We will listen for understanding and remain respectfully engaged. We will deal with issues, not with people. We will be willing to experience discomfort in difficult conversations. And we expect that difficult issues will not be fixed quickly, but we'll continue our work to support and engage our neighborhood and related communities through these discussions. Okay, so next, I want us to take a moment to thank our community partners that help make our Rose City Park activities possible. That includes the German American Society as our gold sponsor. Silver sponsors are Albina Head Start, Early Head Start, St. Rose of Lima Catholic Church and School, Portland General Electric, and Fire on the Mountain. Bronze level sponsors include TDR and Associates, which is me, and Paper Jam. Let's give them a round of applause. Let me first cover the agenda and outline the candidates' fair process before we begin. We will first hear from the candidates for City Auditor, followed by Council seat number 2, that is currently held by Dan Ryan, and end up with Council seat number 3, that is currently held by Joanne Hardesty. At 8:35, we will receive a brief report from each of the 5 neighborhood committees and then adjourn by 9 o'clock. Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Our candidates tonight will each be given 10 minutes to speak. We have asked them to give half of this time to field questions from the audience. We ask that you write your questions down on the index cards provided by our Vice Chairwoman, Stephanie Singer. Do you have any cards?
No, it's our secretary.
Secretary has our cards.
Jennifer Sandhouse.
Jennifer Sandhouse, our secretary, has cards and little pencils if you don't have writing implements for you to write down your questions. Indicate who you want those questions to go to. Auditor, seat number 2, or seat number 3, or all of the above. So write that down on the card so we can use that as we go forward. Hand those forward at any time to either Stephanie or Jennifer throughout the evening. Okay, I will pose 3 questions that were raised by the Rose City Park Board first, and then we'll open up the floor to entertain questions that will be read by these board members at that point. Also wanted to let you know that Helene and Roger Farnham are at the table in the far back by the elevators, and they are looking for more volunteers to deliver newsletters for us. So if you happen to have an interest in walking around the neighborhood and meeting your neighbors and just dropping off newsletters, this only happens 4 times a year. It's a great way to meet your neighbors and to get out and visit the neighborhood. Lastly, please turn off your phones. Make yourselves at home with access to snacks in the back and restrooms across the main entry hall. And join me in giving thanks for being able to speak with these amazing candidates tonight in person. Thank you. So, is Simone Reed here, please? Ready. Excuse me.
Good evening. Hello. Is this working?
Yep.
Yeah, you did have to hold it very close.
Okay. Yeah, keep it close. It's good to see you all. My name's Simone Reddy, and I'm running for Portland City Auditor. I'm going to tell you a couple reasons why I'm running for this office. And I'm really excited to join in conversation with you tonight about issues that you care about. I'm running for city auditor because I care for my community. This community raised me. I was schooled by its public institutions. I started my career here, and I chose to build a family in this city, just south of the Rose City Park neighborhood golf course, to be exact. I've served the people of Portland throughout my life as an artist, an advocate, and an auditor. And when the incumbent announced that she would not be seeking election, I jumped at the chance to apply my public sector auditing skills and my lived experience to this position. As the city's 6th elected official, I want to make our government more open and accessible to all city residents and to inspire the next generation of Portlanders to pursue public office. I'm ready to be your next city auditor because I have a proven understanding of government auditing standards, including independence, and I'm committed to upholding that standard so that our office's work remains credible. I'm dedicated to ensuring that government resources, including our audit resources, are serving those who need them most. And I know that government works best when diverse voices are heard. That means communicating results in ways that encourage the public to be involved and consider their input when it comes to setting audit priorities. I want to thank the Rose City Park Neighborhood Association for hosting this event and for engaging its members in the May 17th election. I'm the only candidate in this race who qualified to the May ballot by nominating petition, which means I have the support of my community, and I was the first to be certified under the Small Donor Elections Program. My campaign is relying on support from friends and neighbors and mentors. And as I said before, I know that government works best when diverse voices are heard, so I'm really grateful for the opportunity to learn and pay attention to issues that you all care about.
Now we'll see if the second microphone actually works. I'll turn it on again. Testing, 1, 2, 3.
Yep.
Yep, okay. The first question in front of the board says, shootings and car thefts are at a all-time high. Break-ins and vandalism are everywhere. Crime is at an extreme. From all corners of the city, Portlanders are saying they do not feel safe. How do you propose to make Portland a safe place to live again?
Thanks for the question. I think the auditor has a really unique role in impacting the safety of our community because it's not a policy-making role. We're the accountability function on policies and programs that are coming from city government. I think the best way to impact safety, health, and equity in our community is to choose audit topics that are going to have a big impact in those areas. That would include taking input from folks across the community, using surveys and different ways to gather information about people's priorities and making sure that those are reflected in the audits and the investigations that we take on during the audit schedule. So I see safety as an input both into the projects that we take on and then also something that we would consider when we're conducting audits and investigations is looking at impacts to human life and health.
Great, thank you. Lately, this is individual point of view. Lately, I've read several statements from Portland City Council members about the need to increase funding to the Portland Police Bureau. None of them even acknowledge that the Bureau's way of performing public safety in Portland has impacts that are not colorblind. What can we do as residents of Rose City Park to make equity a part of every conversation about police funding in Portland?
Well, I appreciate this, this issue being raised, and I noticed in your statement of values that equity is really important to your group. Equity is also important to me as an auditor. It's something that I look for regardless of what topic I'm pursuing. I work at Metro, by the way, in the Metro Auditor's Office, where we're doing a lot of audits where we're experimenting and asking questions about how well government services are reaching people and how equitable service delivery is. So I think asking the question is one of the most powerful things you can do. That's something that auditors have the privilege of doing professionally and publicly. And I think that when it comes to balancing or exploring the issue of equity with regard to the police bureau and investments in public safety, it's a matter of looking at what is the balance of resources dedicated to enforcing the law and also promoting public safety. That's something that we can analyze in terms of budget priorities as well as interactions with police at the neighborhood level.
Great, thank you. The 98 neighborhood associations that make up the city of Portland have long served as the only geographic representation for residents on issues brought to the city. The Charter Review Committee proposes to change the number and makeup of the city council to include district representatives across the city as commissioners. How do you see the role of neighborhood associations moving forward with these new district representatives on the council?
It's super impressive just hearing the number of neighborhood associations we have in Portland. And it is exciting to think about how the structure of our government may change and influence how things are operating at the local level. I think that hopefully with a more representative form of government, that would mean a more distributed model when it comes to serving the needs and interests and distributing resources at the neighborhood level. Many of our city programs and functions operate on a complaint-based system. That includes the police, that includes the ombudsman office, which is under the umbrella of the auditor and serves as kind of a hotline for city concerns. So I would think that having a more representative government would mean folks at the local level have someone they can count on to raise their concerns through the organizational structure of the city, and that we'd see a more equitable distribution of attention to those concerns, as well as resources to address folks' needs at the local level.
Good, thank
We have 2 minutes left.
Okay, so one question from the audience for the auditor candidate. What's an interesting power of the office that we might not know about?
There are many different functions. I appreciate the question. So I often talk about auditing on this campaign because that's what I do day to day. But the auditor's role is really about increasing transparency and accountability. And within the transparency part of the auditor's function is city elections, as well as clerical services and archives and records. So I think it's really important to know that you have an elected official overseeing those functions, and all the more important that she be independent and working at a healthy distance from the other elected officials so that she can maintain access and not bias any of those critical pieces to our democracy.
1 minute.
1 minute. One more.
That was the last question for the auditor.
Any more questions for the auditor at this point? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your presentation. Next, we have Brian Setzler.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. It was good to hear from Simone. And thanks for having me here. It is great to be out for the first event and something like this. I used to live in the neighborhood. It's nice to see everybody here. I used to been to many of these over the years. We all know Portland is on the wrong track. It's going to take all of us to get it back to where we want it to be. We must address homelessness, public safety, and affordability, to name some of the issues we face. we all have to do our part. I'm not just a CPA, but I'm a dad. I raised my daughter about a mile from here, and I used to coach Little League at Wilshire Park, and I also did some umpiring. Once took an umpire clinic and learned some lessons that I think are applicable to the auditor's race. An umpire isn't supposed to steal the show. They're supposed to be fair, call balls and strikes, not favor one side or the other, and they're supposed to be impartial. The city is elected to serve the people and to hold Mayor Wheeler and the city council accountable. The auditor doesn't create the rules or the budgets. The auditor doesn't implement the rules and the budgets are set by the city council and the mayor. They don't do the work. That's done by the bureaus and the city workers. But instead, the auditor is kind of like a baseball umpire who brings integrity to the process and the game by calling balls and strikes. You want an umpire to be fair, competent, and consistent. To get Portland back on track, we need an independent, competent umpire like myself. I've been a licensed CPA in Oregon for over 30 years. The CPA license is the top credential in the profession. Some of the things that drew me to being a CPA were the breadth and depth of the knowledge that it takes to be a certified public accountant. That includes studying management, besides taxes and accounting, but things like management, statistics, finance, and auditing. I've worked as an auditor in the past. I was with the Washington State Department of Revenue and did revenue auditing. I've been an internal auditor for a corporation. I've worked for 2 international Big 8 accounting firms as auditors. I'm also a business owner. I have an MBA in sustainable business. And I've done lots of community service over the years. A couple things right now, I serve on the board at KBOO Community Radio, where I'm on the executive committee. And I'm also a founding board member of Livelihood Northwest. Livelihood Northwest is an economic development organization in Portland I'm really proud of. We serve and help underserved communities, entrepreneurs that are typically underserved, to succeed in business and to build employment, wealth, and success. Of the 400 clients we serve annually in Portland, 78% of those are people of color and 70% women. I will bring a much needed independent outside perspective to this office. So I remain independent of wealthy influences. I too am running in the small donor election. And for that, just so you guys know, and Simone qualified for it as well, but we swear off large donations from corporations or PACs and anything over $250. That way I'm not beholden to any special interest or outside influences, but to the voices of people in Portland like yourselves. I'm also not as beholden to the political establishment. I didn't seek endorsements from any of the city council members. I'm not endorsing any of them. And I'm also not seeking the endorsement from auditors because I want to remain independent. I want to bring that, like I say, fresh perspective and not be compromised by allegiances to old paradigms. I know I can do the job. The question is, who do you trust to right the ship and help get us back on track? As an independent executive, the top professional credentials and a wealth of experience, both in and out of government, I am the right person to serve as your next auditor. I look forward to bringing an independent voice and perspective, new ideas to the office and the city government. And I welcome your support and your vote.
Okay, I'm going to ask you the same questions.
Wow, they're going to get in the weeds for me.
Yeah, there you go. Again, shooting and car thefts are at the all-time high. You do the same questions each time. Be able to speak them on your, you can say them pretty soon. Break-ins and vandalism are everywhere. Crime is at an extreme. From all corners of the city, Portlanders are saying they do not feel safe. How do you propose to make Portland a safe place to live again?
Great question. And as I said, the public auditor or the city auditor doesn't get to create policy, but we can help shine light on some of the numbers that are going on. Where are we spending money? Are we doing it in the right places? Are we getting a good benefit for our buck? Some of the best ways to deal with crime is to do preventative spending and to look at those things. We need to spend more money on things that work and less money on things that don't. My mom and daughter have both been the victims of violent crime in the last 10 years. My mom was robbed at gunpoint. My daughter had a home invasion while she was sleeping. And things like response time are things that we can look at. I know those are important. And really what I hope to do when I get into the office, not hope to do, but will do, is look at what needs to be audited, take input from people, and use the office to shine a light on what needs to be known. See where we can find good leverage points.
Okay. Lately, I've read several statements from the city council members about the need to increase funding for the police bureau, or the police bureau. None of them even acknowledge that the bureau's way of performing public safety in Portland has impacts that are not colorblind. What can we do as residents of Rose City Park to make equity a part of every conversation about the police funding in Portland?
I think equity should be a part of every conversation. As I said, I have an MBA in sustainable business, and we looked in that, or through that lens, and one of the lenses I always use on things is, it's called the triple E in this area. It's economics, equity, and the environment. And it's about looking at all of those things. So, as Simone said, that should be a question that's introduced in every audit we do.
Okay. The 98 neighborhood associations that make up the city of Portland have long served as the only geographic representation for residents on issues brought to the city. The Charter Review Committee proposes to change the number and makeup of the City Council to include district representatives across the city as commissioners. How do you see the role of neighborhood associations moving forward with these new district representatives on the council?
Well, that was one of the questions that was getting done. I really don't know. I'm a huge supporter of democracy and that we have representations, and it will definitely have impacts. I don't know what the impacts will be, but I look forward to listening to what the people want. If the people pass that, I'm going to do my job to implement it as best as I can and to see that it works.
Okay, thank you.
2 minutes.
Okay. Thank you. Can you tell us about an interesting power of the office that we might not know about?
I think the interesting, one of the things I'm looking forward to do is to bring forth the idea of maybe creating more dashboards, so that right now I think the auditors, they do an audit, they write a report, it makes a splash, but then it's kind of stuck in time, and as we move forward, we're looking back at a static report. Dashboards are something that give real-time information to both the government and to citizens to show how things are going. And so I think that's one of the powers, is how do we share information. And dashboards are like on your dashboard of your car, it's giving you real-time feedback. I think that would be an improvement in the city.
One minute.
That's it for the auditor questions.
Okay.
Well, yeah, thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Okay. So at this time, we're going to be moving on to the city council seats. And do we have Alana Joy McCreary here?
Hello. Good evening. Oh, I'm stuck. Hello. You're not going on, can you hear this?
Yeah.
Great. Hi. My name is Alana Joy McCreary. I go by AJ, and I'm running for Portland City Council seat number 2. I'm a single parent, a light-skinned Black woman, a community organizer, artist, renter, non-driver, and a problem solver. I was born and raised in Portland. I went to Benson High School. I remember a Portland where my mom could time me to the minute if I was taking the bus because transit here was that reliable. This is my home. This is the city that shaped me. I'm rooted in this community so much that it's helped me raise my son Hobbs, who's right over here. Hobbs is homeschooled, a local artist, a ballet dancer. He's kind of a superstar. You've probably seen his murals around town. He has a business. I would not have such an amazing child without the amazing community that is Portland. I know my kid wouldn't be the human that he is without this community. I know I wouldn't be the human that I am without this community. And I'm so honored to be in this community. I don't think that we talk about that a lot. Portland is a pretty cool place with some pretty cool people. I had my kid when I was in college, and I am the only parent that he has. I've relied on social services, community-based organizations, and the kindness of those in this community to get by. And that is why you can always find me in community, where I feel most at home, rooted and connected. But right now, I do not recognize the Portland that we've become. There is an incredible amount of unmet need, and ever since I've been lifted out of the position of need, I've strived to be the kind of person that I hope to meet on my very darkest day. And that's why I've been filling in the gaps, pouring resources and support into this community for folks living on the margins. As the executive director of Equal Giving Circle, a Black-led nonprofit that I helped found, I have led the charge to raise and invest over $4 million during this global pandemic to support our most vulnerable Portlanders. We have supported over 25,000 Black, Brown, Indigenous, and immigrant households across Portland. Through our weekly CSA and food pantry programs, we prioritize the sourcing of fresh produce from local businesses and regional BIPOC farms. I'm one of the founding leaders of Mom Block, a large network of moms showing up to take care of one another. We have fed over 800 PPS families when PPS cut nutrition service during the 2020 wildfires. We provided AC units and hotel vouchers to over 100 families during the deadly heat wave last summer. People know me as a doer, a solution-based, data-driven bridge builder, and you can see that through my work on the ground. My support in raising capital for enrichment programs, housing, and direct care. I'm really out here doing this work. Not talking about it, but doing this work. Portland's in a crisis right now. Our housing issues are growing, public safety is not a concept we experience, and climate change is no longer a future threat, it's a right now threat. Unfortunately, some of our current leadership is not prioritizing or addressing root causes of many of these issues that Portlanders, people in this room, people that you know, are facing. We're up against climate change, housing, food access issues, transportation issues, child care issues, health care, the lack of health care. Portland deserves better, and we need leadership that's rooted and invested in community. I am the new energy, the new fresh energy that we need in City Hall. I'm committed to community care and building a better Portland for all of Portlanders. And I know that we're only temporary stewards, and so that's why our job should be about creating a better, more equitable Portland right now for our future generations. It is what my son and our children deserve. It's what all of us deserve. My name is AJ McCrary, and I am your next Portland City Councilor for seat number 2.
Questions from the audience that we thought we would put the board questions at the end if we need to fill time.
Oh, unfortunately, I will not be able to stay till the end.
No, sorry, at the end of your,
Oh,
not the end of the meeting, the end of, so, first question, how would you tackle the challenging issue of folks living in the city outdoors who are not willing or able to meet requirements that shelters or affordable housing may have due to mental health, behavioral addiction issues?
well, shelters aren't really a solution. They're a temporary solution that spend a lot of our dollars and don't create long-term solutions. Currently, right now, we're not building relationships with community members in real time, and there's no trust. So one of the things that we have to do to start helping our unhoused community members, because they're our neighbors, is start to build that trust, to build that relationship, and to make a bond, make a connection, start communication for us to actually hear them, see them, and help them. It's hard to get help from strangers, especially strangers who have historically not been helpful. So I think one of the ways that we're going to address the housing issues is to start to create those relationships. We need people that have relationships in community, in leadership, to help make that happen. We also need to be addressing the wraparound services and creating lasting stuff. Right now, I don't know if y'all know this, but the way that most CBOs and city programs are funded, they're not funded long-term. There's a lot of chasing dollars. There's a lot of trying to make sure that we're still going to be around in 6 months. That makes giving care and working with people who are in crisis really complicated. So we need to start shifting the way that we are building out those relationships, building out that support, so that we can create long-term solutions. I'm also very much for creating housing opportunities, buying homes, particularly for millennials and Black and brown people. There's no programs right now really helping us buy homes or creating generational wealth.
Related question, what will you do to prevent rent increases in Portland?
That's a great question. I mean, like, the instinct you need to say, like, we need rent control. I think that we also need to be creating more programs of assistance. Definitely rent control and definitely addressing what is on the market. Right now, what's on the market is not affordable. I think if we address that at the root, we would start to see some other solutions.
Next question, there has been a local protest called Justice for Kadira happening in the downtown core at Pioneer Place for 66 weeks. How do you plan to address this protest and the concerns of the parents protesting?
I don't like the word address, because that sounds like that parent did something harmful. That parent is in crisis. I think we need to talk to the parent and the family and actually try to address their concerns. I know a lot of parents that are protesting and distraught because their children have been murdered by the police. They want to be heard and they want solutions of safety. They want solutions where these crises, these crimes don't continue to happen. So first of all, let's start a conversation with that person and stop using language like address.
Okay, this is the last question from the audience, and then Richard, maybe you'll tell me how much time we have.
There's a minute left.
There's a minute left, okay, so this is probably the last question. What will you do to prevent racialized minorities from police violence? What will you do to, I think maybe they meant protect racialized minorities from police violence?
Well, that's a really big question. We do have a racism issue in Portland. I think creating not only conversations, but opportunities for folks to be educated and to unpack that and to address that. I'm one of the board members of Race Talks. That's why I have to leave here shortly. And I think like creating relationships, creating programs to support that. Also getting the police training. The police need training. They need better oversight. We need to be working with the police in a different way. And we need to have a no tolerance in our city for violence or murdering of community members. We cannot murder people. That's not how we build community. We can't police people that way. I'd also recommend everyone learn about the history of the police as we're looking into that question.
Thank you.
Time.
Okay, thanks very much. Your turn.
I kind of feel so good to be in a live audience. I went from being in the Zoom meetings for the last 2 years to now being in front of live people with no notes. Like, this is so exciting, yes! I'm Dan Ryan, in case you don't know me, because I really haven't met a lot of people. So I've been on a Zoom for the last 2 years. My name is Dan Ryan, I'm the current city commissioner, and it was about a little over 2 years ago that I felt called to serve My friend and many of you probably knew Nick Fish as well. Late Nick Fish passed away, and it was time to fill that seat. So me and about 18 other people jumped into the race, and somehow this political outsider who got 0 endorsements in the primary got into the runoff. And then on September 10th, 2020, I was sworn into office, and it's been quite a ride. A lot of you, I'd like to just give you a little bit of information about what motivates me to serve. I'm the youngest of 8. I grew up in Portland. My parents chose this place. My mom and dad both had roots here, and my dad was a business person, a small business person in St. John's for over 30 years. And I went to Roosevelt High School, first in my family to graduate from the University of Oregon, first in my family to graduate from college, rather. And that might puzzle you. Why would the youngest of 8 be the first in his family to graduate from college? Well, I was well aware that our family was special in terms of lots of love, lots of passion, and lots of addictions and a lot of mental health stuff going on. And so it was rough. And I was fortunate enough to have great teachers, great mentors, and just a strong will to do something. So I graduated from college, I went on to New York to be an actor, and then I found out I had HIV. So that kind of changed my plans, and I decided I needed a job with benefits. I ended up at a university in the development department because I figured I could be nice to people and see if they would give money to things, and that became my career. And the good news is I had a wonderful career in New York and in Seattle, and then I found out in '95 that after having pneumocystis pneumonia twice, that I was told I had 6 months to a year to live. So I figured I better go home, that's Portland, because my sister is the one person I knew that could deal with me at the end of my life. And this just did, science, right? So science had some new medications out. I was able to turn my life around physically, and the same doctor that told me to make plans said, you better go back to work. So I've had the joy of serving this community for 25 years prior to jumping into this sector. And whether it was Portland State, Oregon Ballet Theater, I was on the Portland Public School Board where I served for a few years, and I see a couple faces related to that era. And then I ended up at All Hands Raised, and I was the CEO of that organization that used to be the Schools Foundation. So my whole life has been about service. After I left All Hands Raised, because after 11 years it's a good idea to let someone else take over a gig, that's when I got called to serve. And it's just been quite a journey to be a member of the City Council sworn in 2020. I sometimes feel like a surgeon that is on this operating table, and boy, this patient does need surgery. And then everybody in the city is like the family that's like yelling at us or me because I clogged their arteries the last 20 years. My point is, people, we can get out of this ditch. That's not my point. We can get out of this ditch that we're in, and it's going to take all of us coming together, working together for really viable solutions. And some of the things that I've had the pleasure of focusing on is, with all of us on council, we made a decision to focus. And we focus on community safety, we focus on homelessness, and we're focused on economic recovery. I've been very clear in my statements on the council to stay focused on those priorities, because that's what you do when you're in a crisis. When it comes to homelessness, I was thrown into the deep end with the assignment at the dotted line to the joint office. I really noticed right away we didn't have a continuum from living on the streets, chronically houseless, all the way to home ownership. Both bookends of that continuum need support. How are people going to go from being chronically houseless for multiple years, many with mental health and behavioral health issues, in the great state of Oregon, which happens to be last place in both of those categories? How are we going to move people in those conditions successfully into housing? So that's why I have the audacity to focus on building safe rest villages in our community, which will be bringing services to people, providing a village, not a camp, a village with a lovely restorative setting, with a nice security fence around, with services for mental health, behavioral health coming to them. And the key thing is to do assessments. We don't know our houseless members by name. We have never done data in real time to actually get to know everybody on the street. And that's what's important. Once you get to know people by name, then you can actually move forward and make smart decisions on what kind of housing they need. In addition to that, when it comes to community safety, it was really clear that we needed to put community first. I reached out to Commissioner Rubio when she got elected, and I said we need to have investments in the community so that we can build relationships and build trust between those on the ground most impacted by violence and the police. That's how you build bridges. And so it's been wonderful to do ride-alongs with those organizations and get to know how they are connecting with families impacted by violence, and then how they're building relationships with law enforcement. I've also been honored to be on a city council that's expanding what community safety means. Commissioner Hardesty brought up a very good idea that's been taking off called the Portland Street Response. And so to have Portland Street Response, fire, police, 911, all of it has to come together for a first responder system. And finally, on economic recovery, has anyone in this room ever tried to get a permit from the city of Portland? Anyone? Has it been a good experience for you? I didn't think so. So anyway, I got the audit, and it's almost the same audit that was done 12 years prior that said we have one of the worst performing permit systems in the country. So unlike some past city councils, I worked with Commissioner Mapps, and we have created a task force. We're making great progress. There's some policy coming to the council soon that I hope will be passed, but more importantly, we're doing the surgery that's necessary to actually streamline the system. And that's what collective impact's about. That's what's about to be data-driven, and that's the kind of solutions we need today. I'm not a career politician. I probably would have jumped in earlier to this business. I'm a hometown guy that just wants to love on his city in the end of my career, and I'm just grateful to be here. And I will stop so you can ask me a couple questions.
Yes, 3 minutes left.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, so why has your Safe Rest Villages proposal not been launched yet, even though it was promised for 2021? And why is it so small considering the huge need?
Well, that is a deficit question. Well, first of all, it has been launched. It was a 5-0 vote by the city council. That's not easy to get. And then the chair of county government and all of the county commissioners were also in support of it. So that's not easy. Then we were able to hire the staff. My point is, this person, that would be Dan Ryan, is a very ambitious person. I like to set goals. I like to get the government to get the let out and move a little bit faster. So I thought by putting an ambitious goal out there, that would be magical. Turns out you only have so much power, and it's taken a little bit, it's taken some time, yeah. However, not that long. When was the last time we actually tried to do something innovative and new for the houseless in our community? I think that housing is important. Of course, it's the most important aspect of someone moving out of homelessness. However, I say services first. We have to know who's on the ground. We have to get to understand what their needs are. I was motivated to run mostly because my brother died in 2014 on the streets after suffering mental health and behavioral health issues for years.
2 minutes.
When our family tried to do interventions with my brother, he would be fine for 2 or 3 days, but then he'd go right back out there because that's where his community was. And that's where he, as an addict that's untreated, you go out on the streets and you get the drugs. You choose that over the love of your family. We have to be honest about what's going on our streets right now. And so the Safe Rest Villages are an on-ramp to create that relationships, that honesty that's needed so we can eventually move people into housing and more importantly, be successful in housing. So we'll probably have 2 that they're all under construction. All the sites have been found and we'll be able to move in. And a couple of them should be built by the end of this month. And in 2022, they will all be opening up. So that's called progress. And by the way, there's a rotation, 6 to 9 month assessment period. And then you can actually figure out where they should be going next, whether it's single occupancy units, whether it's a group situation, whether it's a place where you need behavioral health and mental health support. Next question.
Given the scope of the challenges in 2022, is there enough money and person power at the council to get it done? And second part, why can't the council and mayor be clearer in explaining to the public where we are in addressing big problems, such as houselessness? It would really help to have a realistic progress report, especially when we're considering city council elections.
I agree with everything this person just said. We do the best we can. It's hard sometimes to get your message out. It gets filtered sometimes by people that aren't so charitable. So just know that. We also need to do a better job at the county level. County runs all the services of giving us real-time data on who is on the streets.
Time.
That's why I passed with the county to get on-ramp support for data. I'm going to stop right now, but trust me, I'm a data nerd. We're on it. You will get more reports. And it was so lovely to be here live with all of you in Rose City. And thank you, Neighborhood Association. You're the backbone of our city. Thanks.
Council seat number 2. Next up, we have City Council seat number 3. Renee Gonzalez, are you here? Absolutely. Here you go.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
I actually have a big voice. Can you hear me in the back? I can use this if it's necessary, but can you hear me okay back there?
Yeah.
I'm gonna pass on this. So, well, thanks so much for having me. I feel like I'm home again. I'm a 20-year East Sider. Lived my entire professional career here in the city of Portland, with family going back over 100 years. So I feel very at home in this neighborhood. I'm running because I'm deeply concerned about the trajectory of our city, about declining livability, brought about by out-of-control crime and uncontested homeless problem. So I'd love to get into those details and what I'd like to do about those two issues, but I would like to keep it with laser focus, that is my primary drivers for running for city council. On the east side in particular, we have a mammoth issue with out-of-control RV parking, illegal car parking throughout our neighborhoods that I think we need to confront very directly and very quickly. But before I get into some of those details, I'm going to give you a little bit more about my background. My grandmother died and was born in the city of Portland, was born on the east side here. Like I alluded to before, my maternal family goes back here 100 years. I've raised 3 children in the city of Portland, all on the east side. So deep ties to your neighborhood. Built a little soccer club in Northeast Portland to be the largest in the state. Rose City Soccer Club was one of our original founding members. So have coached, have led youth throughout these neighborhoods, and again, just feel at home again here. By way of professional background, I'm a private sector guy. I started a big law firm downtown, went in-house and was a legal manager and what's called a strategy manager for a number of years for a big child care provider in the city of Portland. I spent the last 10 years running my own law firm and technology company. Just a little shop, 6 employees, taking care of Northwest businesses as well as on the technology side, companies throughout the country. My engagement with the city of Portland changed dramatically 2 years ago when they closed schools. And so prior to that time, I was deeply involved civically, was on the Portland Children's Museum, the Library Foundation board, as well as the president of a large soccer club, but was very much a private sector guy. And then schools closed down, and children's access to sports and the arts closed down. And I led a statewide effort, bipartisan, to safely reopen schools in the state and in the city, to safely reestablish access to the arts and sports. That process, that experience, really caused me to question the way we make decisions in the city of Portland, the way we make decisions in this state. And as I was looking around and looking at the decline of livability in our city, inability to confront these real challenges of crime and homelessness, I thought it was time to speak up and address it directly. So high level in terms of what I think we're doing wrong in homeless, we need to prioritize shelter. That needs to be a #1 priority, and that may mean reallocating dollars from long-term investment in housing. I'm willing to make that bet. I'm willing to make that choice as a city. Again, there's other players. We got Metro in the county. I don't want to oversimplify the complexity in that trade-off, but we need to prioritize shelter. And one, because it's inhumane, the way so many of our neighbors are living on the streets today. And 2, we need to relieve our neighborhoods of the burdens of out-of-control, unsanctioned camping in our parks and on our sidewalks. So to do that, we have to have shelter. I also don't want to skip over the more fundamental issues of the unsheltered. And again, it's going to be hard to talk about that in 10 minutes, but high level. We have #1 cause of the unsheltered, addiction. #2, mental illness. As Dan alluded to, we are not a good state at addressing either of those issues. That often gets dumped on urban settings like the city of Portland. As a city commissioner, we have to be strong advocates for each of those 2 pieces. That means beating up on the state legislature to assure adequate funding and services for both those 2 areas because they are significant contributors to our unsheltered population. One last piece there, and again, there's a lot of nuance on that that I'm happy to get into. We lack a functioning acute detox center in the city of Portland today. That's a major gap in our social services, and it is a major gap in how we address meth addicts and those suffering from opiate addictions. There's simply no place to take someone in a highly addicted situation when they're struggling with overdose. So that's a problem right now. They either end up in jail or at the ER, or they're just not addressed. That is unsustainable, it is ineffective, it is inhumane. We need to prioritize that, filling that gap in our social services.
5 minutes.
You know, in terms of crime, I think, you know, high level, we need adequate funding for our police, we need to protect funding for our specialists, but I do want to observe that crime is multifactorial. We cannot mass incarcerate our way out of our crime problems. We need to protect our underlying programming, our access to schools, to sports, to community, our access to faith organizations, our access to cultural organizations. That is our social fabric. It has been deeply ripped apart in the pandemic. We need to do everything in our power to restore those underlying organizations. I think that's the most equitable way to address crime. It addresses the underlying issues. One last piece, economic activity. So many of our entry-level jobs were disrupted during the pandemic. We need to find a way to reestablish that. You take away schools, you take away introductory jobs, that leads to crime. And so, again, we got to adequately fund our police. We need to end the fund culture, which has permeated our society. But we've got to address the underlying causes of crime and protect the institutions that direct children, to direct the young people in the right direction. I'll stop there and love your questions.
3.5 minutes.
People for Portland is pushing for a ballot measure that seeks to redirect from the recently passed bond measure to require that the 3 metro counties dedicate at least 75% of this bond revenue to emergency shelters. Your thoughts on this?
I think directionally I'm in agreement. I think it's a sad indictment of our, voters' faith in existing government that we have to do a bond measure to address this just a couple years after we all approved this large measure to address the issue. So, two commentary there. Directionally, I think we need to prioritize shelter. I think it's but unfortunately it's a reflection and a lack of confidence by voters that our elected officials are making the right priorities there.
What will you do to protect racialized minorities from police violence?
Yeah, this is a tough one. And certainly when we look at the defund police movement, and part of it was, and particularly with respect to specialists, the gang reduction, the gun reduction defunding, it was in large part to respond to concerns of over-policing in certain communities. It was a venerable driver, in my opinion, but it had horrific unintended consequences. So we traded over-policing in certain communities for out-of-control homicides in those communities, out-of-control crime in those communities. So I want to fully recognize the challenges associated with it. We've got to create an environment that attracts and retains high-quality people that will choose law enforcement. Part of that, we do have to shift the culture. I think we do go too far in demonizing the police department. We need to make it an attractive place for good people to work. And then secondly, I harken back to more fundamental causes of crime. And when we have an absence of functioning education institutions, we have an absence of access to economic opportunity, we interrupt access to our cultural or spiritual institutions, that drives crime. So we want to address equity in policing and law enforcement. We have to make sure that our most disadvantaged have full access to those underlying institutions that lead them in the right direction and away from crime.
Thank you. There has been a local protest called Justice for Kadira happening in the downtown core at Pioneer Place for 66 weeks. How do you plan to address this protest and the concerns of the parents protesting?
I actually heard the question earlier, and I was not very familiar with the background of that, so I'm happy to answer that offline if that's okay.
So whoever asked that maybe will...
Yeah, please come my way. I think I got a gist of it, but I'm not sure I know the whole story.
So what will you do to prevent rent increases in Portland?
Yeah, this is a great one. So while I think the challenges of the unsheltered are largely driven by a segment in population that's driven by addiction, that's driven by mental illness. When we look at medium term, we do have a real problem with affordability in the city of Portland, both in terms of purchasing a home or renting. That is a real fundamental problem. So what can we do about this? One, permitting process that Deanna alluded to is a major problem. It takes too long to get permits in the city of Portland. The whole process is unpredictable. You have subjective review at times by city council on those that makes it, and this is driving away.
Time.
Do you want me to cut off or is that?
Yeah, no,
Time.
it's time.
Okay,
So thank you.
I'm going to answer that question offline. Thank you so much for having me.
Next up is Joanne Hardesty.
Good evening, and thank you so much for being here this evening. I normally start these conversations by saying thank you. I know many of our community members survived COVID because of neighbors looking out for neighbors, checking on people who were shut in, bringing food, and I want to start every conversation that way. It's because of mutual aid that so many people survived the pandemic. The biggest honor I've had in my life has been to serve as your Portland City Council member. And over the last 2 years, I gotta tell you, I'm waiting for the locust, because every other disaster has hit this city, right? We had a worldwide pandemic, we had wildfires, we had heat, we had cold, we had it all. I was waiting for the locust, but luckily the locust never landed. So, what have I accomplished in the midst of all these crises? One, I changed our 911 call center to create the first change in 150 years, and that is the Portland Street Response. So as of yesterday, you can call 911, and you can directly ask for Portland Street Response, which is a non-armed response to people in mental health crises. I am so proud of that. The second thing that I did was actually create a ballot measure to create the first of its kind truly community oversight board to hold police accountable for community standards. 82% of voters agreed with me, and right now, 20 community volunteers are building a policy that the City Council will pass before we implement that very first body. The third thing I did is another national model, the Portland Clean Energy Fund. You may remember, grassroots community members decided that billion-dollar corporations should pay a tax, and if they made $1 billion, they pay 1% of their business tax into the Portland Clean Energy Fund. So they had to have two criteria. First, they had to be $1 billion, that's with a B, and have to make $500,000 in the city of Portland. So the corporations that are crying after making exorbitant profits during COVID, that they are paying a mere 1% into investing in BIPOC communities who have never had access to these kind of resources to actually have control of their future. So the same people that are behind People for Portland are the same people that were lobbying against Portland Clean Energy Fund, and the same people that are trying to convince you that we've done nothing as it relates to our houseless population. Let me tell you, when COVID hit in March of 2020, some of our community members lost everything. They lost their $15 an hour jobs, they lost their housing security, they lost their kids' education security, and those people haven't even started the road to recovery. So when we talk about our houseless population, we cannot paint them with one brush. They're not all mentally ill. They're not all drug addicted. Many of them were working 2 and 3 $15 an hour jobs. But today, because the cost of living, the median family income for a family of 4 in the city of Portland today is $96